Howdy, everyone. All right, I've been working on getting the flap and the aileron back onto the airplane. I have those in place. A couple of things that they talk about when you are getting ready to set your angle of incidence. So like I had said before, I'll recap real quick. This top longeron needs to be level. I picked a certain location on the longeron and I just circled a couple of rivets so that I always use that same location to do my measurements. And I have the same location marked on the other side just for consistency. So with this level, you use your wood block. Again, this is all explained in the instructions. You put a wood block on the web of the rear spar. So you want to be on or behind the rivets. And then you have it rest just forward of the seam here. And if you look, you'll see that that basically puts you on this flat part, the web of the spar. You don't want to be up into this area because I believe it rides uphill a little bit. So with your straight edge resting on here, and then it comes across and it sits up on top of your 3-inch block that goes here, you want that level. So that should be level in conjunction with the longeron here being level. Now they say that that is not super critical within reason. What's super critical is that you have both sides the same. So if you're using a digital level and you can't get this to 0, you've got, say, 0.2 of a degree in either direction. You want that same 0.2 a degree in the same direction on the other wing. They do go into, if you do have to change the angle of incidence here, then you have to make some changes at the tail. But they talk about that in that little supplemental paperwork that I had showed you that I had printed off directly from the website. Before you drill any holes, and they talk about this as well, before you start drilling your hole back here on the spar, you also want to make sure with the flap, oops, I've got my bolts in here, but I don't have them tight. Let me move this out of the way. Here we go. So you want to make sure that when you bring your flap up, that obviously it does not hit the side of the fuselage here. And you want to make sure that you can get it to retract all the way. If you have your rear spar sitting too far down, then when you bring your flap all the way up and it touches, try to explain this. So you've got this skin here on the bottom of the flap. This skin comes up and touches the bottom of the fuselage. That's what you hear. That's the skin, the bottom skin of the aileron touching the bottom of the fuselage. You want your gap through here to be consistent. Now, when you're adjusting your angle of incidence on the wing, if this spar is too low, you may have problems getting your flap to touch. It may hang down a little too low. Or if you have it come up and touch, with the spar being too low, the aileron won't be in trail with the rest of the wing. And vice versa, if you're setting your angle of incidence and you have the rear spar too high, again, the flap is going to potentially contact the bottom of the fuselage, but it won't be in trail with the rest of the wing. In this orientation here, especially across the bottom, it won't be in trail because this rear spar is too high or too low. And when you look up underneath here, you want that skin, this is going to be very difficult to see, you want that skin to just touch the bottom of the fuselage. And you can tweak things, of course. You can see that there's a lot of skin here. There's a lot of skin here too. There's a lot of skin here that you can bend and tweak around if you need to. But my point is that when you're setting your angle of incidence, you have to be mindful that this is what you're moving up and down, and it's going to impact potentially how your flap fits with the wing and the fuselage when it's all the way up in the retracted position. You want to make sure that you can get your flap all the way up in the retracted position. You don't want the rear spar up so high that even though you can get your flap to touch here, it's not touching underneath the fuselage at this end. And that in effect will give you like a little bit of a down flap all the time. Just some things to keep in mind. And the other thing, of course, is while you're doing all your movement, if there is any to set your angle of incidence, it's very critical that you maintain edge distance on that bolt. You got to maintain 5/8 of an inch edge distance all the way around that bolt through all the material. So just some things to keep in mind. Another thing I want to point out before I get too far along, on my particular flap, I decided to use one long continuous hinge pin. I did not do the method where you cut out some center eyelets and you can run the pins from the middle toward each end. So what I have done, I have gone ahead and you cannot have the hinge pin sticking out on this side here. If it sticks out, when you have your aileron potentially in its full travel position, trying to do this one-handed, this bracket will end up hitting that hinge pin if it's sticking out this way. This edge of your aileron will hit the pin long before you get full travel on the aileron. So in order to capture the hinge pin, I just went ahead and I tapped the hinge for a 440 screw, and I've got that screw in place. I don't know if this will focus on that, but you can see the screw there on the end of the hinge. I went ahead and I drilled this hole where you feed the hinge through the hole, or you feed the pin through the hole into the hinge. I made this a little bit larger so I can get my Allen key through the hole and onto the head of this screw. It's an Allen head screw. So that's retained there, and then of course on the other end, the fuselage itself prevents the hinge pin from coming out. All right, so this side obviously has been drilled. Everything has been set. As I said before, I've got the wing set up this way in here, this movement here for the overall sweep of the wing. I didn't have to do any up and down adjustments. I went ahead and put the flap and the aileron on, and I made sure everything was nice in trail and everything fit really well. I didn't have to do anything on this side. On the other side, I had to trim the aileron a little bit right here where it meets the fuselage. So with everything set, the sweep is good, this up and down here is good, the angle of incidence is good, the flight controls, when they're in their neutral position, are all in trail. I went ahead and drilled the hole, and I went ahead and modified the hinge, as I just said, by threading it for that 440 screw. Put the hole in the bracket to get the hinge pin in and out. So now I'm going to start working on the aileron. I'm going to go ahead and put in my washers, just like I had made note of, which are in some other videos of mine. Just made a note what the layout is in here. I'm going to put all that back together and hook it up to this. And then I'll go back and I'll do the exact same thing on the other wing. So I'll come back and go over some of this stuff a little bit later on the other side, potentially, just to recap a little bit. But this is very time consuming and it's very involved. And again, it's super important because this is all part of the rigging of the airplane. How you rig this, how much attention to detail you pay is going to directly affect how the airplane flies. So you remember back in my other video when we were building the wing, I spent a lot of time using the tooling holes on the wingtip. There's some tooling holes through here, and you put a straight edge across here, and then you use that to set up your aileron, to get your aileron perfectly in trail with the rest of the wing. If you don't remember that, go back and check out that video. So you do the same thing in here. You have to verify that you can still get the aileron in trail with the rest of the wing, and that you can get your flap then perfectly in trail with the aileron. And just as it's coming up in trail with the aileron, just as it's coming up into the full retracted position, you want this to be correct underneath here with the way that the skins rest against each other and the way that the aileron meets the fuselage. So a lot of detail, a lot of screwing around, but it's really not that bad. If you did a really good job on the wing setup when you first built the wings, and you had your straight edge using the tooling holes, and you got your aileron in trail, you got your flap in trail with the aileron, and you got the trailing edges of those nicely lined up. If you did that correctly and you did it well, this just goes together. Like I said, I didn't have to do anything on this aileron. It fit just about perfect. I didn't have to jack around with my angle of incidence at all. So, all right, let me button up a few things on this side, and then we'll move over to the other side and do the whole process over.